All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is February 25th, and I will be completing, sorry for that. I will be completing the discussion or the coverage of the third topic for the first LP, as I've promised in our FB group. All the supplemental videos will be updated or uploaded by today so that you will have ample time to work on the exercises as well as wrap up your learnings and your takeaways for the first learning packet. Now, as always, you are free to post any questions or any parts of the learning packets that are not clear. Please post your questions on the group, on the FB group, because I'm working on the second packet and the ideas and the concepts that we are going to tackle are becoming more complicated. So that's why I made an effort to include supplemental videos because I wanted you to master the fundamentals so that the more complicated topics will be a lot easier for you to accept or to digest. Okay. So, anyway, this afternoon I will be talking about the connection between language and identity and the main reason why I wanted to include this in our class, in our course, is because, well, by nature, we try to make up generalizations and assumptions of other people based on the things that can be observed. And one of those things that we can observe would be that person's language. So most of the time we make conclusions about others based on the language that they use. So that's what we are going to explore. Is there really a connection or a correlation between language and a person's identity? So what are the things that we need to unlearn and what are the things that we need to bring with us as we proceed and move on to the next topics in this class. Okay, so who are you? How old are you? Where are you from? What do you do? What are you doing now? Those things can be implied by the language that we use. So let's start. I've said at the beginning that we are going to try to connect or correlate language and identity. So, of course, when we say identity, that means how we see ourselves. Where, where do you see yourself? Where do you belong? What are your attributes? And what makes you you? That's what you would call an identity. Like in layman's term, I know there are a lot more professional definitions. Maybe we could ask a psychologist and they would have a different definition. But in essence, in layman's term, it is how we perceive ourselves or how we show how we see ourselves, our place in the world, and what makes us, right? So the first thing, of course, that we need to look at when talking about identity is the physical identity. Now, before we start, let me ask you, do you think there is a connection between the physical aspect of a person and their language? Is there a correlation between what a person looks like and the type of language that they use? So if you have already covered all or the rest of the learning packet, you would you would have realized that in some aspect there is, in some aspect we are just being judgmental. So let's take a look at the things that I've included in the learning packet. So a lot of this are self-explanatory, but I did want to record a video in order to emphasize or incorporate some very important discussions. So let's see. So of course you will find that there is very little correlation between the physical type and the type of language that they use, at least in linguistic features. Like, for example, sometimes we see someone. I mean, in my case, I'm big, right? I'm huge. And then, well, my voice is, well, some people expect that I would sound this way, but there are some people who are big who would have a high pitched voice, or there are some people who are thin but have a very strong forceful voice. So there really is no correlation, there is no generalization that you can come up with, that you can say that that person looks like he could sing, right? I don't know if you have watched the show. What's the title of the show? The one where people pretend to be singers and then the judges decide which one is the right singer. I mean, is the actual singer, that one. So we cannot really tell just by looking at the person's physical aspect what kind of language, what linguistic features they would have when they talk, right? So there's a reference to a German psychiatrist before who made assumptions regarding to a person's physical body type to the kind of condition or their mental health. You could say that. So I think this is no longer accurate this time around because there is no basis for this. There is no scientific data that will support this. So, but when we look at the physical condition, not the physical aspect solely by looking at the person's outward characteristics, but we look at the physical condition, like obviously there are people who have had their throats removed because they had throat cancer. Like say for example those that speak with a voice box, like a it looks like a recorder, and they press it on their throat and it creates a sound, but it's robotic and it makes them sound like a robot. But they do that because they don't have their voice box anymore, because it was impacted with a certain type of cancer. So obviously when you see a person like that, you would know right away that that person's linguistic features would be affected, right? Or children or people who were born with physical physical disabilities, like those who have cleft palate, those whose upper lip didn't close, or those who have shorter tongues. So, of course, if that's their physical condition, then it would impact their language and it would impact the linguistic features, right? So, obvious, obviously, there is a correlation there. A person who is disabled, who is differently abled, sorry if I wasn't politically correct earlier. So, if a person who is differently abled will definitely have an effect on their linguistic feature on their language and their linguistic features, because we have studied this you probably studied this in your linguistics and in your subjects before in senior high and high school, that voice is produced by the speech organs, and if there is a problem with any of the speech organs, then the voice and the speech that will be produced is going to be affected. Okay. Next, we look at another factor, which is age. Of course, when we listen to someone, not unless they do it for a living, like an impersonator or whatever, but if we look at an ordinary person, we can tell if the person is, I mean, not look, if we listen to a person, we can tell more or less if the person is younger or a person is old, and so on and so forth. Why? Because the linguistic features are affected, maybe with the voice. The other linguistic feature would be the vocabulary, or maybe if you're talking to somebody old, like already old enough to have Alzheimer's or other mental disorders, then maybe their speech will be affected. So that linguistic feature will give you an idea that the person is old. Now, looking at sex, this is a very sensitive topic. Of course, what with people being very conscious about feminism and equality between all of the sexes, I mean, both of the sexes and all of the genders. However, culturally speaking, there are already existing cultural norms set forth based on a person's sex or a person's gender. And there were examples that I have stated or included here. Like, for instance, in Japan, there really is a social act that that is only used by women, and not all women use it, only women who are rich or who belong to the upper sector or upper portion of the society. So if you use it and you're a man, then you are violating social norms. Okay. Actually, there are also what's this there are also assumptions or generalizations that are made for how men and women speak using English. And you can see I do not agree with this generalization, because I mean, I know some men who has some attributes or behaviors from the women's side. However, this the data that you see is based on uh, data that has been mined for those for English speaking countries. However, this was done. I don't have a year for when this was done, but I doubt if it was done recently. So I think this book that I'm referencing here was 2013. So more or less, studies should be more careful about making assumptions or generalizations based on a person's sex or gender. Okay, next. Another part of identity would be psychological. When you say psychological, the most common would be intelligence, and this is one of my pet peeves, because I mentioned this during my introduction video. In the context of the Philippines, people assume that if you're able to speak English well, that you are intelligent. And I could argue for days supporting the contrary to this. Why? Because there are some people who just string along words and sound convincing, they bluff, but if you really will and check what they're trying to say, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can some people make it a point to master very difficult words, very um, highfalutin words. But unfortunately, if you go to the core, they're just basically saying a simple idea, and there's nothing new there. So, depending on how you interpret or how you define intelligence, I do not subscribe to this. But enough of what I think. Let's look at what science says. So it is evident that people are judged based on how they use language, and I sometimes do not like it when I some my parents are I think my parents are boomers. Yes, I think so. And there are a lot of behaviors or practices that I cringe at when I see them do it. But being that they are my parents, I also try to tell them in a polite way that what they're doing is incorrect. One thing that strikes me, or one thing that I remember with this, is that my mom would sometimes say, "Mal edukada ito hiya kung magyakan, diri ada hiya edukado kay kung makabuyaya." Right? So, what is the problem with that statement? The problem there is that the person is making assumptions on someone based on what they hear, and that shouldn't be the case. Why? Because there are many factors that affect, and you will learn more about this in the second learning packet. There are many factors that go into play when a person decides to make a certain language choice. So in learning packet 2, we're going to talk about the language repertoire, meaning it's like a catalog or a brochure where you can choose which language which which dialect you use. And depending on the context, depending on the factors that are in play, you make a decision. So you cannot make that assumption that since a person is cursing a lot, that that person is mal-educated. You are enforcing your own set of standards on yourself onto others, right? So what does science say? Science says that there are no studies. I mean, there is little data to prove the correlation between language and intelligence. Although this is one of the most stereotyped attribute to language. Like for example, why is it that a lot of people choose to speak in English when they want other people to listen to them? Like for example, in my case, when I was in Cebu and well, it's a common thing for call center people that you demand to speak to a manager because you're probably well, the thing is, if you're a customer service representative, you know the kind of customer service that you deserve as a client. So therefore, if you're not satisfied with the service that's provided to you, you can complain. However, what I do not agree with is when we look for the manager, we switch and talk in English. And again, I will go to the hypocrite side. Personally, when I get angry, I tend to speak English because I did mention before that I am able to express myself better in English. I struggle when I speak in waray, and if I'm very angry, I wouldn't be able to express myself really well. Now, but that the thing is, it works in the Philippines. It works in the context. Why? Because it's a cultural thing. We have grown up to a society that has put English on a pedestal, and everything around us supports this idea. So that's what I'm trying to say. It is enforcing, or it is it is supporting the building of stereotypes. Okay, next, personality. Personality, another psychological concept. um we we can't really tell what a person's personality will be based on the language that they use. However, these studies that I've mentioned here are very interesting. Why? Because they did like you can see it here, a matched guys experiment. What do you mean by this? They had students read English sentences, and they had the students read the 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 same sentences translated to French. And then the respondents were asked to mark some characteristics that they would assume of the speakers based on what they have heard. However, a lot of people identified positive attributes for those who were speaking English, but upon closer look, those two languages were spoken by multilingual students. So that's a very funny thing and shows you what language can do to perception. And for the longest time, there are also other assumptions or other what you call this other things that I other stereotypes, I mean, that I see on social media, like Italian is the most romantic language. Why? What's the basis for that? No. Sometimes they say French is the most romantic language, or they say German or Russian is a very angry language, and they're probably just making an assumption based on how the person sounds when they speak. Uh, I did mention before that I moved to Manila, Central Luzon for the rest of my college years, and most of my friends would say, Sassy, ang lambing mo naman magsalita. Ganyan ba ang mga waray malambing? Malambing ba ang accent nyo? And I would say, and they would laugh at it because waray-warays are known to be, I don't know, maisok, right? When we speak really fast. Hindi tayo malambing. Ilocano ang malambing. Ilocano ba? Ah, no, Ilonggo ya. Sorry, I'm confused with that too. Ilonggo ang malambing, hindi waray. But I think they've built the stereotype based on based on what they know about the language, and they would say malambing daw ako, but I don't think I'm malambing. Actually, to the contrary, a lot of people are intimidated with me. So really, language can affect a person's perception of his or her personality. Okay, so vocal stereotypes, I think I don't need to explain this. You can clearly see the descriptions from each of the personality type. So for those who are not familiar, these are personality types: phlegmatic, melancholic, choleric, and sanguine. And then you have your introvert, your stable, unstable, and then you're extroverted. So depending on your personality type, you will find the behaviors or the vocal characteristics or traits on that part or section. Okay, let's move on because if I keep on talking, this will last for 1 hour. Okay, next is your geographical identity. Like I said, physical identity is how you look. Your psychological is has a psychological identity is how you think, and then your geographical identity is where are you. Okay, so this is one of the most obvious things, most obvious connection of language to our identity, right? When you see or when there are waray-warays who get together, if you are very keen or if you're a good observer, you can predict or you can see some characteristics from how they speak and can identify if they're from Eastern Samar, if they're from Northern Samar, if they're from Samar, if they're from Tacloban, and so on and so forth. Why? Because there are some words that are only used, or there are some intonations, or there are some linguistic features that are only observed on certain parts of Samar and Leyte. Okay, so that's the easiest correlation. So I also included here a differentiation between dialect, idiolect, and lect. So the biggest circle here, or the general term, would be lect. Okay, so lect is refer used to refer to a variety of language for a given community. So, for example, in Catbalogan, all of the languages that are present or that are being used in the speech community of Catbalogan is considered lect. Now, what is a dialect? This is one of the questions that I raised with the teaser or the appetizer question that I posted in our group chat. I mean, FB group. So, a dialect is an abstraction derived from the analysis of a number of idiolects and languages. So, and a dialect is a specific variation of a language. And the smallest would be the idiolect. The idiolect would be the linguistic system of a single speaker. Like, for example, I remember when I was in college, there was one professor in UP where my friends and I would take out a piece of paper and we would write or we would count or tally the number of times that our teacher used however in the discussion. So that is actually an idiolect, meaning these are the set of words. This is the vocabulary, the accent, the stress, the intonation that a certain person has. That's why you can tell, okay, this message was sent to me by my friend because it sounds like her. So idiolect. And then then if a series of people get together, then you will have a dialect. A dialect is like, for example, the easiest way to understand dialect is And again, before we proceed, before I forget, Waray-Waray is not a dialect. Waray-Waray is a language. And there are many dialects under Waray-Waray. For example, you have your Estehanon nga Waray-Waray, that is a dialect. And you have your Nortehanon nga Waray-Waray. And then you have your and then actually maybe I even think those are quite general pa. Meron pa yatang mga specifics. May mga mas maliit pa na mga dialects in between. And later on, you'll also find out about a sociolect. So a sociolect is more or less like a dialect, but in a dialect is created based on the geographical location of people. A sociolect is not based on geography, but based on social groups or social status. So, for example, if you and your friends use a series of words or use a language or a system of communication that is purely understandable within your group, then you have a sociolect. Okay? So again, magkaiba po ang dialect and ang sociolect, because dialect is based on geography, and then sociolect is based on social status or social groups. And then the idiolect is the smallest one because it's our individualized or personal linguistic system. And then the lect is the general term used to refer to all the languages for an entire speech community. And then languages and dialects are different because dialects just are just specific variations of a given language. Okay. Next, accent refers to the pronunciation, while dialect refers to grammar and vocabulary. So, for example, if you hear someone speak and speak in English, but there are some people who speak in English, like for example, if the person speaking is from India, you can there are some linguistic features that show that that person is from India. Therefore, that person is not speaking a dialect, but that person has a different accent. Okay? A dialect includes the grammar and the vocabulary of a specific group or area in the geography in a specific location. Okay, so I got ahead of myself. So here it is, language versus dialect. So again, language is different from dialect. They are not interchangeable, and I have already explained this. So the concept, oh my god, my F's and P's are switching, which is common for Filipinos. It's a common problem. Anyway, dialect continuum. So for example, there let's say if you travel from, let's make believe that there is a place in Catbalogan, let's say if you walk from say from SSU going to ano ba ini nga diretso ngadto, let's say if you walk from SSU going to Mang Inasal, okay, this street, sa siyang straight na street, okay. If you walk the street, you will pass by, let's say, four barrios. Let's just pretend that it's a very that the space is wider. Okay, so apat na barrios kang dadaanan. So each of these barrios, knowing how language is dynamic and knowing that language absorbs social factors, you would probably find four different variations of the same language, right? The thing to remember is that even if meron silang mga variations in between them, Barrio A, Barrio B, Barrio C, Barrio D, even if may mga pagkakaiba sila, if they talk amongst each other, for example, merong nanay sa Barrio A na pumunta sa Barrio D kasi mamimili siya ng mga gulay, magkakaintindihan pa rin sila kahit yung gamit nila is dialect. Because although there is variance, there isn't enough variance to consider na iba ng brand or iba ng dialect ang sinasabi or ang ginagamit. Okay? So, Yun, that is a thing. However, apat lang yun na magkakatabi. What if, let's say, from SSU going to Yabong? So mahaba-haba na siya, malayo-layo na siya. And let's say instead of just 4 barrios, you have 20 barrios na magkakatabi. So eventually, dahil malayo sila, and there are many the variations, there will come a point doon sa daan na yon na kahit 'di ba dapat lalakarin mo lang para malaman mo na may mga minimal variations. Kahit may minimal variations lang siya, si Barrio A, kung pupunta siya sa Barrio 20, ano ba yung 20 na letter? So si Barrio A, yung nanay sa Barrio A, pupunta dun sa Barrio, let's say, Barrio 1, na pupunta dun sa Barrio 20 kasi mamimili siya ng gulay. Hindi na sila magkakaintindihan dahil sobrang dami na nang nag-change doon sa dialect na yes, sobrang laki na ng change ng difference doon sa dalawa. Okay? So that is why we need to study and we need to look at the behavior of these people. How will are they going to create a lingua franca? Kung gusto ni nanay bumili ng gulay doon sa Barrio 20, yung taga Barrio 1 na nanay, ano ang gagawin? Kasi hindi na sila nagkakaintindihan or malamang meron na siyang chance na hindi sila magkakaintindihan. Kasi nga, it involves a lot of differentiation na. Okay? Now, the next part here is that talks about dialectology, and it talks about just how the study of dialects started. So, buti nga tayo ngayon because we already have the help of technology. We can easily do this. But before, you can see that it's very difficult to conduct these types of studies. Okay, next is our ethic and national identity. So, I didn't include a lot of discussion here because mag-overlap na siya doon sa discussion nyo sa inyong araling panlipunan dati, sa inyong sociology or social studies na klase. Ethnic identity is just your allegiance to a certain group based on your ancestral links. And then your national identity is, again, the identity that you attach to your nation or to your country. Okay? So, meron kayong activity dito. I hope you already visited www.ethnologue.com. It's a very, very useful tool and I hope you signed up kasi pwede nyong ma-explore yung iba-ibang languages using that website. You can also look at the types of languages. I mean, yung mga terminology saan nanggaling. If you're curious, you can even look at saan ba nanggaling yung Filipino, saan ba nanggaling yung Tagalog, saan ba? Kasi there is a theory in linguistics where that says that all languages came from a mother language, right? So, you can just use that website to explore. And I encourage you to just follow your curiosity and just learn learn to find resources and search more and more. There are many references available to you. Language is a very interesting topic and there are many things that it comes into play with, but there is no other relationship that is closest to it than social factors or society. Okay, anyway, naghintay ako ng mga questions niyo. Wala naman sa inyong nagre-raise ng questions. So, I'm assuming naintindihan na. As I've mentioned in my post on the FB group, your deadline is going to be March 6, right? Tama ba? March 6 yan, di ba? So please keep in mind that your output for this is going to be at the end of the class, you're going to submit your journal notebook. Pero sa ngayon, kasi hindi pa naman tapos yung klase, and since I required you to submit electronically, susulat niyo doon sa notebook niyo muna yung mga answers niyo sa lahat ng activities at saka sa exercise. Pero isa-scan niyo and then i-upload, isa-send niyo sa akin. Okay? Pero by the time na mag-finals na tayo, ipapasa niyo yung notebooks or journal notebooks ninyo. Understood? Okay, sige. So, it's been I don't know how many minutes, but I hope that was an enlightening discussion. Should there be any concerns, alam niyo na ang gagawin ninyo. All right. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. I will get in touch with you on our Facebook group. Bye.